So oftentimes if you are in an AP class with statistics or you're taking the AP test, they will say something like describe the distribution, or sometimes they'll say compare two distributions. Whenever you see the word distribution and you have to describe or compare something, you always are going to have four things that you want to mention. So the first thing is going to be the center. The second one is going to be the spread. And then we're going to have the shape, followed by any outliers. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit of detail, and then I'll talk about the shape in more detail. So the center of a distribution will usually mean either mentioning the mean or the median. The spread is going to be generally either the standard deviation, which you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't heard of it, don't worry. We will go into it in detail. You have that to look forward to. Something called the interquartile range, or IQR. Once again, we'll go into that in detail. The last one is, you'll sometimes see, is the range, which I think you probably have seen before, maybe even back in elementary school. It's going to be your maximum minus minimum value. But that one you see less often than the previous two. The next thing we're going to talk about is shape, and we're going to look at that one in just a minute. The last thing is outliers. So outliers is going to be anything that is values that are far from all the other values. This is another one that we're going to discuss in detail in the next section. However, the one I want to talk about right now is the shape. So if you're looking at a histogram, you can have a histogram that is symmetric. What I mean by that is that if you were to cut it in half, you would be able to divide it into two. Now, don't expect it to be perfect all the time. Sometimes it's going to be not perfectly symmetric, like the one I just drew is not perfect. Then you would say it's approximately symmetric. So you are allowed to do that. You're allowed to say approximately symmetric. I'm going to show another way you might see something symmetric. Sometimes you'll see it like this also. And you might see other similar things that are symmetric. The main idea with things that are mostly symmetric is that you can usually cut them in the middle and have the same thing, mirror images on both sides. So the next two are among the most confusing for everybody because their names are the exact opposite of what you expect them to be. The first one is skewed left. So when you have something that's skewed left, that means that you have lots of values on the right, but then on the left-hand side, you usually have what we call a tail. So you have very few values on the left. That one we say is skewed left. And you might be able to guess the exact opposite is going to be skewed right. That means you have a lot of stuff on the left-hand side, but then you have a tail that extends all the way out to the right. So you're going to have a few high values out on the right. So now, the next word that we're going to talk about is unimodal. So actually, I have three things right now that are unimodal. And I'm going to point to all of them. So these three things are all unimodal. What unimodal means is that it has one major mode. And by mode, I mean something that occurs often. So a unimodal thing is going to have one peak. Our next word, bimodal, means that it's going to have two peaks. And I actually drew one already. That means you're going to have values concentrated in two different places. So in this case, the one I gave you has values at both ends. Now the last one we call uniform. Uniform would be if you have a histogram and everything is pretty much all the same values. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can say it's approximately uniform, But in this case, it's going to go pretty much straight across. So this is a uniform histogram, or approximately uniform histogram. You don't have any major peaks. You have things mostly concentrated throughout.